I'm Mike Gastineau, and this is Iconic Sonics presented by the Swinomish Casino and Lodge. And welcome to another potential award-winning podcast with two guys I have known for a long, long time, and guys who have, one guy's been involved in basketball in this market for like 612 years. Francis Williams is the coach. He has influenced the lives of a lot of young basketball players and has moved into a role as a broadcaster in the second part of his great career. Francis is now with Root Sports and is working with Root as they penetrate into the Seattle market with the Portland Trailblazers this year. Francis, good to see you and welcome. Thanks for doing this.
Yes, I appreciate it, man. I thank you for the kind words. Danny, good to see you as well. It's been a long time. But yeah, this is a great opportunity. I'm excited to get into the conversations with you guys.
And Danny, of course, is Danny Oneil, as I said, longtime Pacific Northwest journalist. And Sonics beat writer when? I was looking back, was that like late 90s, early aughts?
It's 2002 to 2005. So
okay.
I would say that I had their last gasp of greatness, that 50-win team in 2004, 2005. And then they let Nate go after that year. He went to Portland and it kind of went downhill after that. But I loved the 3 years covering the Sonics.
And you bring that up, and I want to talk to both you guys about a guy who played in that era, who I have not talked about as much on these shows as I should. He was here for a short time compared to a lot of the great Sonics we talk about. But Ray Allen, and I think his career has come back into focus again, Francis, with Steph Curry breaking his record. And we'll talk about Steph and the rather ridiculous potential numbers he could put up. But Francis, it does make us kind of refocus. And you know, Ray was here a brief time. You talk about that last gasp great team, Danny. I can see Ray's shot in game 6 rimming out. And I mean, maybe that forces a game 7 if it goes in. Francis, what about Ray in terms of the legacy of Seattle basketball and the way the fans look at him and his entire NBA career?
Well, I think, you know, he wasn't here for really an extended amount of time. So I think with Ray, we kind of got a snapshot, really. We didn't really get a chance to get all the way into Ray to the point where he has this lasting legacy as a Sonic. But I've always looked at Ray from the standpoint of, you know, we were fortunate here in Seattle, those of us that are old enough, you know, we saw Fred Brown as a great shooter, saw Dale Ellis as a great shooter. We got to see Ray Allen as a great shooter. So we've been blessed to see some of the best to ever do it, see it, you know, do it here in our market. But strictly as it relates to Ray, you know, he set the tone early, and obviously it was his record that was broken the other night by Steph. But what I think with the evolution of this 3-point shot is the fact that Steph, along with Lillard and now Trae Young, it's the distances that they're shooting the shot from with a lot of accuracy that is changing the game. So, you know, it was great to see Ray did what he did, even though it was for a short amount of time in this market. But even as well as he did it, the game in that respect has changed with right now, those three in particular doing what they're doing.
Danny, your memories of Ray as a Sonic, and as Francis says, it is fun in this sport. There's a lot of different elements to it, but there's something about just watching a shooter. And Ray could do some other things, but if you're thinking Ray Allen, or you're talking about his career, you go, well, you'd go shoot first. He was remarkable at that, and I know he worked at it hard.
He's an incredible shooter. I mean, I think before him, Reggie Miller was he was kind of, in my mind, Ray was the next iteration of that. Ray was stronger going to the hoop. Ray and Reggie were comparable on the defensive end, and that neither cared all that much about that part of the game, but dominant, just incredible players. I will forever remember Frank Hughes, who I think we all know and love, former reporter for the Tacoma News Tribune, informing Ray that the ball wiggled coming out of his hand, saying, yeah, if you stand right behind you, Ray, you can see that the ball kind of wiggles as it comes out of your hand. And Ray's response, what are you talking about? He promptly gets a basketball, shoots about 10 in a row. It's like, did that wiggle? And Frank's kind of, I don't know if Frank was teasing him or if he was getting at him, but Ray was, and Ray, nobody in Seattle wants to hear this. That was a hell of a trade. Gary Payton was coming up on the end of a contract. The Sonics had decided they were not going to give him a raise. He was making franchise player money at that point. They were not going to go that high. And they traded less than half a season to Gary Payton and Desmond Mason for Ray Allen. And Ray Allen was, I mean, he's the best player on a Bucks team that came a game away from getting to the NBA Finals. A year Allen Iverson goes to the finals. That was Ray. And yeah, there's Big Dog that was there, but he was a hell of a player. And I will always wonder what would have happened if they paired him with Kevin Durant. Because if you remember, Ray is on the team that loses all those games, and you go through the changes, and then they win the lottery. They're the number 2 overall pick, and they draft Kevin Durant. But that night they traded Ray as part of the deal that got Zoolander, Wally Zerbiak,
Right.
and the pick that became Jeff Green, who arrived there. And I'll always wonder if they wouldn't have been great that first year because Durant still had so much to grow. But year 2 or year 3, would they have been good enough? Would they have been able to score enough points? Because, man, you talk about what you could do with the spacing on the floor with those two guys. Ray was a great player. And if anything, it's a shame that we didn't get to see more of him, because if that franchise hadn't moved, I think you would have saw Durant and Ray paired here for a number of years.
And would Nate have stayed, is another thing. And would Nate and Ray have been able to come to a peace? Because you're right. I mean, Steve Bulpett, the longtime NBA beat writer out of Boston, once said to me about Reggie Miller, he cannot guard a lamppost. And I love Reggie Miller. I'm an old Pacers guy. Kind of the same thing that, you could Nate, a defensive-oriented coach, come to a long-term peace with a guy who, as you put it, Danny, was not all that interested? Let's play defense so we can get the ball back and I can shoot again.
It was they would have had to come to a peace, and I think it was tougher because Reggie's skin and bones. Ray had all the equipment to play defense, and I don't think Ray was wrong to come to this conclusion. It's like, hey, it's better off for me not to take a charge and stay healthy and able to shoot than it is for me to be throwing my body around. And that's just never Nate's not going to be able to accept that long term. And maybe he's changed now, because I think he's got some of the same changes. But yeah, I think that separation might have been more inevitable. The trade of Ray, though, was entirely precipitated by the owner wanting to gut the franchise in anticipation of moving it.
Francis, in your career, you coached AAU, you coached high school. You got a lot of experience as a coach. It's a little different at a younger level than at the NBA, clearly. But are there guys that come along? I mean, clearly there are, where a coach has to say, you know what, I am going to adjust my thinking a bit because what this guy brings me at a certain end of the floor. And I'll give you the other example, would be like a guy like Rodman, who just, offensively wasn't as skilled, but was so good at rebounding, so good at defense. Like, well, we got to have him out there. It doesn't matter that on offense at times. And the smart thing Rodman did was he never asked for the ball. He was like, whatever. I know I'm kind of not the greatest offensive player, but do you have to adjust as a coach? Sometimes you're thinking for a guy who can do it at that level.
Yeah, I think you do. I mean, I think that's one of the qualities that a good coach has. I mean, you have to adjust to, the players that you have and try to make your system fit into their strengths. But if you're trying to make particular guys fit into, this is my system and this is the way we're going to do it, or else, well, that's not always going to work, because you may not have those type of players. So I think absolutely you adjust and make make things work for the talent and the players that you have on hand, and try to figure out a way to mesh it all together for success.
You and also, if you're a coach, it's got to be like when you're like, just try a little bit. Just try just a little bit more. Like, I know, just try a little bit more on defense, because defense is all effort. Like, yeah. I could totally get how that just drives a coach bananas, where they're like, man, I just need you to try a little.
Yeah. And I don't mean to the point of just, casting everything out and, you do what you want to do. But I mean, you can have an offensive minded team, you can have a defensive minded team, depending on the personnel that you have. But sure, effort is the first line item. We've got to have optimum effort at all times. And then, we build on that. And a lot of times I think that would have been, going back to Ray for a minute, those of us that had access, the shot that he made for Miami from the corner, those of us that have access, how many times have we seen him practice that shot? every day after practice, takes off his shirt and goes through that regimen every single day in practice. We've seen him practice and make that shot hundreds of times. So when you saw him make that shot for Miami in the finals, those of us that have had access, that wasn't a surprise. We've seen him do that. It's a part of his DNA. I can make this shot. This isn't a difficult shot for me. So when we were talking about him and KD, it would have taken KD a while to figure out how hard that guy works to be the player that he is. I'm sure that KD is that player now. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. But coming in as a rookie and having so much to learn, as you said, Danny, it would have taken a while between those two being able to coexist and the Nate factor. It would have taken a while.
I think it's a great point you bring up about shooters and practicing. I think most people realize that these guys, it's rare the guy who could just roll out and go knock down shots. Most of these guys put in an incredible amount of work. I'm sure Steph Curry is in that zone. And I want to get your guys' thoughts on where's it going to end for him. I read a really interesting piece last week after he broke the record about, if he stays healthy and he keeps making threes at the rate he's making them right now, and he plays another 5 years or maybe another 8 years, he may play into his 40s. We're seeing more athletes now who take advantage of nutrition and medicine and science and all that, and they're able to play longer. He broke the record in 2021. He may not be done breaking it or setting it or establishing whatever the new high is for another 10 years. What's the limit for him, Francis? How high can the sky go for Steph?
I don't have a number, but I'll put it this way. I'm 62 years old. In my lifetime, that record won't be broken. And I'm pretty much going to go on record that I think that at the clip he's going, that's one of those records that I don't think will ever be broken.
Danny?
Francis is 62. I got to get up on his skincare regimen. You look great, man. You look phenomenal.
Yeah, we look like crap, comparatively speaking. Crap 1 and crap 2 and Francis are your guests today on Iconic Sonics.
I think what's most, and I love Steph Curry. I love watching him play. And Francis mentioned how he and Trae Young and Dame Lillard have really changed. They've stretched the floor in a way that we've never seen it. And just the shooting range, when you have to pick them up, you have to pick them up dang near half court. Otherwise, they're liable to pull up on you. You do have to pick them up at half court, or they are going to pull up on you in Dame Lillard's case in the playoffs against the Oklahoma City Thunder, and one of the greatest shots and my most favorite shots of the past 5 years because it sent the Thunder home. What's amazing to me about Steph is not just that range, but the volume. He is at 43% career shooter at threes, and people will talk, well, he takes so many shots. I was like, he makes 43% of them. It's what he has been able to do. And you talk about coaches that work with what they have. Give Steve Kerr a lot of credit because he doesn't work as much in pick and rolls as many players do in today's game. His usage is not that high. And I'm convinced part of that is because they don't want him to take the beating that would come with that you do get bumped around and they've been able to, he still gets those shots and makes those shots at a clip, even though his pick and roll usage is lower than some of his peers. And it's phenomenal. And there's times that I look at the sort of video game scores that pop up and I'll get a little wistful for the more physical era of basketball. But the reality is that a player like Steph is one of the upsides of that because you're able to watch such a skilled athlete and it's not mucked up by the hand check. Like he's allowed the freedom to operate, and you can have a championship caliber team with a player that's that small. And you look back even 20 years ago, and Allen Iverson was able to do it for 1 year with the Sixers, but getting a smaller player who is able to be that kind of year in and year out threat, it makes the game more fun. I think Steph Curry is a beautiful basketball player. I love the style that he plays.
It moves me into another topic. We're of the belief here at Iconic Sonics that the Sonics are coming back, whether it's a couple of years or 3. There's a building now. There's some momentum. And if that's the case, Francis, you talk to people and in Seattle, and there is a belief of, well, I don't know, the NBA kind of screwed us over. I'm like, all right, put that aside. And then I hear, the game just isn't good anymore. And I'm like, well, now hang on. And Francis, I'll ask you, it's different than it was 15 years ago when the Sonics were here. It's definitely a different game, as we just talked about.
Mhm.
I'm not so sure it isn't as much fun and as exciting. It's just, Danny's right. Some of the physical play is missing, but my gosh, you watch Trae Young in Atlanta, you watch Dame down there in Portland, and there are a lot of good big guys all of a sudden in the NBA. Talk about the differences in the game since 2008 when the Sonics left. When they come back, fans are going to see a different NBA.
Well, I think it's the use of the 3-point shot. You have these big guys that are incredibly skilled. And if you want them down there pounding on each other and beating each other's brains out, then, that's old school basketball. And who knows, things are cyclical. It may go back to that one day.
Right.
But right now, these guys are incredibly skilled in all sizes. And the ability that they have to stretch the floor, it is a different game. It's, let's keep in mind, this is entertainment. When we talk about NBA basketball, it's entertainment, and they're doing everything they can to make the game entertaining. They want to continue to be attractive to the younger demographic, so that game just continues to grow with their fan base and the people that are interested in the game. So they're doing everything they can to make it an offensive, fast-paced game with the lack of attention span that a lot of these young folks have right now. They're doing what they can to make it attractive to them, and I think that's smart. So it is a different game, but if you hone in and just zero in on the ability that so many people have to shoot the basketball effectively, and their skill at all sizes at every position, you will some nights be amazed, because there's very few games that I watch where there isn't something that happens in the game that makes me go, wow. Every game, it might only be one thing, but every game I see something that just makes me go, wow. And I'm not the easiest person to say wow, because I feel like, Gas, you and I were born, we're in the sweet spot. We got to see, the legends, some of the older legends when they were coming along, whether we saw them in person or we saw them on TV. We got to grow up with the Chamberlains and the Russells, and we on the fringe of going back a little bit further than that. But being in this sweet spot now and seeing the game go to where it has to this point, I think that we can accurately, a lot of times, assess where the game is right now, because we've seen so much of it. So I think the game is in good hands, and I like where it is right now, and I like where it's going.
Danny, what was the best era of basketball, just in your opinion, looking back? I mean, you can go back to, let's say you hear people talk about the Chamberlain Russell days, like, well, we're fist fights every night. Well, I'm not sure that was true, and I'm not sure that's great. Certainly, I mean, coming out of college in the early 80s and watching that decade and the amount of star power and all that, and then into the 90s with Jordan and now into today, what's your favorite era?
My favorite era is right now. And the reason is because it's less predictable than ever. And I think this reality was hammered home for me when the Toronto Raptors won the title, because when that playoff started, I would not have had the Raptors among the 5 teams that I thought had a legit shot at the title, where I would say, like, hey, I'm 99% certain the champion's going to come from this group of 5 teams, which I think throughout history, I mean, you could even say in some years it's 2 or 3. And the Raptors won. I love how it's wide open. Look, my sort of formative basketball is Magic, Bird, even the Rockets with the Twin Towers. It's 80s basketball, and those were great. But there is a handful of teams in there that really had championship. The Milwaukee Bucks were a great team with Terry Cummings and Sidney Moncrief and Ricky Pierce there for a little bit, but they weren't really a title contender.
Right.
You have so many teams that are legit title contenders. It's not the way the NBA used to be. I think that relates in part to what Francis said about the changing nature. You don't need a big man. How many years do we watch the Sonics pay $6 million to a center because they needed somebody to go up against Shaquille O'Neal, Calvin Booth, Jerome James, Vladimir Stepan? Like, this was, today's game, you don't need that. Today's game, you don't have to have that. I think it's phenomenally exciting. I absolutely love it. I think we see the most skilled players, and I think we're getting a chance to see those skilled players showcased. And there's a level of uncertainty that the league has never had, at least in the time that I've been watching, and I love it.
And Francis, taking Danny's point that the role of the center is not what it once was. There are a phenomenal amount of good big men in the game right now. And that gets back to, hey, it's a fun era right there. There are a lot of guys, and they don't necessarily play traditional. Maybe that'll cycle back, as you said, but there are a lot of big men who are fun to watch right now in this style of play.
Yeah, absolutely. And to Danny's point, I think it just makes it so exciting. The NBA is at a point right now where they've got, not quite to that extent, but they've got the NFL parity where you really don't know who's going to win, as opposed to my favorite era. Just to go back to your initial question with Danny, I think because of my age, the Magic Bird era for me was just, I'm the same age as Magic Johnson. So coming through, watching him in high school, the Michigan State time when him and Bird and their rivalry started, for me, that's my favorite era. But it's just a scotch ahead of what we're seeing now because of, again, the skill and the parity that's there now. It's just fun to watch, and the big guys being able to do some of the things that they do. I mean, you just pay attention to that because you're seeing big guys do things that, number one, they weren't allowed to do. I think that's another piece of it, because there's a Northwest guy that I would use as an example, Richard Washington. Now, Richard Washington, UCLA guy, played in the league, he had a nice career, from Portland, went to Benson High School in Portland. Richard Washington would have been Kevin Garnett if they'd have let him play that way. But because he was 7'1", he had to play down on the block. But Richard Washington was skilled enough to play on the perimeter and do a lot more than he did if he'd have been allowed to do it. And so now that guys are just being allowed to, I mean, if you can't play out there, then get your big butt underneath the basket. But if you can play out there, like Slick would say, get underneath the goal. But if you can play out there, then be effective and do what you can do. But I think Richard Washington, going way back, is a prime example of, there have been guys from time to time that could do that, but now there is, they're not the reluctance to allow them to do that.
Isn't that crazy? Because I think about this in football all the time too. We're seeing quarterbacks allowed to run. There's this extended period of time where they're like, nope, the players have to be a widget. And if he fits these prototypes, this is the way he's got to play. And how much worse we all off. Like, the player doesn't get a chance to showcase his talent, which is probably the biggest thing that bothers. We don't get a chance to watch it. Like, I hear that, like, there's a Kevin Garnett that came from Benson Tech. We didn't get to see it. Like, that's, yeah. It's great when you give people a chance to realize their full skill set.
Mm-hmm. We've talked about this a little bit on the show with various guests. Francis, was George Karl a little bit ahead of his time in the way he structured the 90s Sonics? The 90s Sonics played a little bit like today. And they had a big guy. You had big guys out of Detlef and Sam and these guys out on the perimeter. Danny, for as much as you talk about, they kept trying to find somebody to play the post, and George would, they'd draft a guy or sign a guy. George would play him 2 minutes, and then he'd be at the end of the bench the rest of the game. Francis, weren't the 90s Sonics a little bit like today's NBA teams?
Well, I think we spoke earlier about, making guys fit, not necessarily making them fit their system, but playing to their strengths. And I think that's what George did with those teams in the mid 90s. I mean, I've got this set of guys. This is what they do. We don't have the big man in the middle, so we can play small. We can make people adjust to us. We can junk up our defenses, and we can do some things that make them uncomfortable. And we've got enough talent, and we've got people in the positions to do what we need them to do that gives us a chance. I mean, they had a chance to win every night. A lot of that is attributed to George because he would adjust and he would make you adjust to him. And so you think about those teams, how would they look in today's NBA? They'd probably do okay. I think they would need a little bit better shooting overall than they had been. And, they had a couple of snipers. They do a little bit more shooting overall, but I think all in all, those teams in today's NBA would probably be okay. Definitely be playoff teams.
Right. Put Ray Allen with the 90s Sonics, Danny, and all of a sudden you got a championship contender.
Yeah, well, I'm also thinking Ricky Pierce is probably a much different player now than he was then. Ricky Pierce was good. Like Ricky Pierce was one. Ricky might have been a great player in today's NBA. The way he was. Sam Perkins would have been your original stretch four. Like that was what he did then. Was people didn't really understand it, and you would. But I think Francis is right. You would need when you had GP and Hersey, like you would have needed a little more shooting at that spot. But certainly the creativity that George exhibited in his lineups.
Yeah.
If you had the 90s Sonics playing today, there would be extended periods where Detlef would be playing 5 for you, where Detlef would be your center, and you would go small and try and run him into the ground. And I don't want to say it's too bad because those were phenomenal teams and they won 60 games and everything that we got to see from them. But I really believe even with Michael Jordan playing at the time, we would have seen the Sonics win a title if we transport them into today's NBA.
But their problem would be is that they would not be allowed to be as physical as they were.
That's true.
Especially Gary out front.
Right.
So now Gary out front chasing Steph around. Let's just envision that for a minute. Well, Gary, you ain't gonna be able to put your hands on him.
Yeah.
Not gonna be able to check him. So that would cause them some problems. But I think all in all, their basketball IQs were high. So they would make that adjustment, but they would not be allowed to be as physical as they were during that time.
Gary Payton is fouled out of the game. We're 7 minutes into the first quarter, and Gary Payton is done for the night.
He probably would have had to dial back some of his conversation with the referees too, the way that they're calling that now. But God, I have no, I miss GP. I love GP.
Well, the way they've got the technology has allowed for the courts to be mic'd even better. Gary would have been, you think Manning cast is a big deal. Let me tell you something. Peyton cast, if they just had Gary mic'd up for every game, the ratings would have been, you couldn't have calculated them. They would have been so high.
I was telling someone one of my favorite Gary Payton expressions, and he would say they would be working on something in practice, and he would say to him, "Coach, that's not going to work when the popcorn's hot." And it would be his explanation, like, "This is all well and good. Yep. When game time comes and the coach, this is all good, but it's not going to work when the popcorn's hot."
Yeah, when the popcorn's popping. When the popcorn's popping, that's not going to work.
He really was. I mean, from a standpoint of skill, from a standpoint of charisma. And I love the guy I now call when I see him Grandpa Gary, because now he's happy to see everybody and he wants to talk to you all day. But he was kind of always, he would communicate. He put up some walls when he was a player, like a lot of guys do. But I don't know that there's a guy I enjoyed covering and watching day in, day out, night in, night out than Gary Payton. And I used to say, the thing about Peyton that I always liked, and I told him this a couple times, and he loved it. He'd nod. Yeah, that's right. I'd say, Gary, people call my show and they say you dribble too much. They say you talk too much. They say you do this. I said, no one in 15 years has called my show and said, it didn't look like Gary was trying tonight.
There you go.
He gave you everything he had every night, and he never missed games.
Missed games. It's one of the things that gets undersold. And I'm of the opinion, I think the NBA product would be better if there were 30 fewer regular season games. I know that's not going to change. I know that the way the economics work and all of that. But the one thing about Gary was Gary played always. He played hurt. He played with a jacked up back. He always played. And that's it's the kind of competitiveness that a lot of guys think they have and don't. A lot of times guys will look for and I don't begrudge him for it, of playing the longer game and staying healthy and rest time and load management and all of those things. Gary just didn't do that. And that's because of just how singularly tough that dude was.
And I think that's a critical point, Gas, when we were talking about coaches adjusting. And I don't say this negatively at all. Now, Gary didn't always practice.
Yep.
But George and those guys knew what they had with Gary. Gary was going to show up when the popcorn was popping.
Yeah.
And he was going to give you everything that he had. Now, Det used to give him grief all the time, like, "Hey, Gary, thanks for joining us, and blah, blah, blah." But they knew when game time came what they were going to get with Gary. And that is to be commended, because he never shortchanged us for 1 second with his effort, which we started the show off with effort. We never were shortchanged by Gary Payton in that regard.
My favorite Det story, and this is his rookie year in Dallas. He was drafted. I think Doug Moe's the coach down there then. I think Doug Moe was coaching him in Dallas, and he wasn't playing Det. Det's a rookie out of the University of Washington. He's not playing him. And Det goes down and he signs up to play in a rec league. He signs up to play in a rec league, and the GM finds out because they're telling him, and he goes to him and he's like, Detlef, like you're under contract with us. Like you can't go play in a rec league. And Det's like, why not? He's not playing me. I want to play basketball and he's not letting me play. So I should be able to go somewhere that I can play basketball. And I think it was you, Gas. I think you told me the story that George Carlin once explained to you that the thing you had to understand about him is what conversation started each day.
He told me once, George and I were having one of our go rounds where he's like, you say bad things about me on the radio. Like, George, I say a million good things about you. And he goes, let me tell you something. What you don't understand is that every single day of my life starts with a 30-minute argument with Gary Payton. Every day, man. And I was like, yeah, I never thought about that, but A, I believe it's true. And B, I bet that is a hard way to start your day. When we talk about effort, and I was anxious to get you guys to talk about this. If I were to morph back into the world of sports talk radio, I think this would be one of the topics I'd go back to again and again. Francis, why is LeBron James's legacy so difficult? I think most people fall into the category of, hey, LeBron's a great player. He's one of the greatest of all time. What he's never been in trouble. He's never brought any kind of shame to anything. People argue when he left Cleveland, it was awkward, and it was, but so what? And then I think one of the most badass moves ever, he says, I'm going back to Cleveland and I'm going to fix this. And he goes back, gets him a title. And they seem cool with him saying, I want to go to LA. I want to sunset out in LA. Who wouldn't like that deal if they could make it for themselves? But there is a bigger percentage, in my opinion, than with, say, Jordan or with Shaq or with Kareem or with Magic or with Bird, the other guys we throw into the category of who are the greatest, Kobe. There's a lot of people that don't like LeBron. And I don't know why is that? First of all, do you agree with my conclusion here? And why is that?
Oh, yeah, I agree with you. But I think it's complicated from where I sit, but I hope I can explain it. LeBron has positioned himself to be in control of LeBron.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people struggle with athletes. I think if we sprinkled a little Kurt Flood into the equation or some of those types of things.
That's right. Yeah.
LeBron is in control of LeBron. Now, he also does not take a back seat with social issues. And whether he's right or wrong, or whether he's not, I'm not saying he's never had any missteps.
Sure.
With some things that he said, but he takes a stance on social issues. People don't like to see athletes do that. Now we can go back to, when Jim Brown and Bill Russell and Ali, Lou Alcindor / Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, when they would sometimes make their statements or their stances on social issues, they weren't the most popular people either. So I think you now fast forward to the time we live in now with social media, where so many people have access to what you may say or what you may do or how you may feel or whatever it is that you may state. I think that this guy is he has put himself in the middle of so many different issues that there just are a lot of people that don't like the control that he seems to have over all the things that he's involved with. And I'm not saying he hasn't had any missteps, but I think he has what all of us want. What's going on with me, I'm in control of it, not somebody else. And if he feels like there's some things that he doesn't have control of, he's doing everything he can to try to get control of. So I think people struggle with that. And but that's just who he is. And from where I sit, I love it. I absolutely love it. I'm not saying I agree with everything that he does and how he does it, but I love the fact that I feel like his focus is what's going on with LeBron James. I'm going to be in control of it. Nothing wrong with that.
Danny, the idea of a player orchestrating like who his teammates are and all that I think does rub some people the wrong way. I'm not sure why. Again, we most of us in our jobs have that ability within whatever contractual obligations we have. I've always argued with people and said, look, this guy grows up in Cleveland. He's got the spotlight on him from the time he's 12. He's never had a serious, he's said some things, but we all say things that are silly and in retrospect, but he's never had any kind of negative spotlight on him for anything he did. He goes from Cleveland to Miami, wins some championships, then says, I'm going to go back to Cleveland, wins a championship, then says, I'm going to go to LA, wins another championship. And you just don't see that often. I mean, and at some point you have to go, well, geez, yeah, he's able to get guys around him, but he also might be pretty good at this sport. What's your view of LeBron and his legacy?
He's, in my mind, the best all-around player, certainly that I've ever seen. And I didn't see Wilt, so I can't really speak on that. But I believe his all-around skill set and what he does at the size he is and the variety of roles that he's able to play, he's the best player. I think that what Francis said about the control he has and has exerted over his career, I do think that doesn't sit well with people. And I'll take it a step further. I think that he not only has not fit into sort of and conformed to the expectations that people have for him, which was, you're the kid from Akron who's blessed to be playing for your hometown NBA franchise, even though he's from Akron and not Cleveland. Like it was, most of the hostility that came up, I think, reflects the fact that he's not doing specifically what they want him to do, which is, in my mind, that makes me admire LeBron more, because we've watched him grow up under the most intense microscope that any professional athlete has ever grown up under in this country. He was on the cover of Sports Illustrated before he was a senior in high school. And he has navigated through that and become someone who has agency, power, and control. And I think that that's incredible that he's done that. We think about different high school. I think about teen tennis prodigies, man. Like, how many of them end up hating the sport or burning out and all of those things? He's been under an even more intense incubator in team situations, and he hasn't done that. When he went to Miami, I hated it. And the reason I hated it was because it felt like the three best kids in class were teaming up together to game the system, and that I worried that the league was going to be less competitive because of it. It was great for the league. When Dallas beat them and I was rooting for Dallas that year, it felt there was nothing wrong with that. And what I saw was that most of the antagonism that LeBron received after that was over this idea of, how dare you leave Cleveland, which I was like, that is an abominable approach to take. Like that part of it. I didn't like the fact that the three best kids in class were teaming up. Like, that was it's the super friends that are forming. And I felt a little, I cheered for the Warriors for a long time. I felt a little the same way when KD went to the Warriors. Those championships felt different because of how it was. But the idea that LeBron owed it to anyone to stay on a given team, no, that's old. That is an outdated, and I would say it's a bankrupt ideology. Like, nobody in today's world is expected to do that in their job. Stay with the team that first hired you when you didn't even have a choice of going there. Like, no, I admire LeBron a ton, because he has, at different steps, and I'll agree with Francis, like, I think his TV show's corny. Like, I don't watch it. I'm glad he has a TV show, and I think that it reflects something that he's trying to do. And I really admire how LeBron has done that throughout his career. He has not taken the approach that I'm going to be as inoffensive an entity as possible, which, by the way, when dudes do that, I don't begrudge them that either. But I really admire the way that he's conducted his career, and he's an incredible basketball player. You talk about that series they lost to the Mavericks, which I think is probably, if you're going to look at his resume, that's probably the one that you're like, they lost to a Mavs team that wasn't as good. The reason, in my mind, and Francis probably got a better perspective on it, the reason they lost that is because LeBron is such a good basketball player, because he understood what he should pass, and they got him to give up the ball to other people. Like, they played into his sound basketball instincts. The fact that he is a great fundamental player and understands spacing ended up costing him in that series. So I've never really rooted for LeBron, but I love LeBron.
Well, that was the point in his career where he figured out that there is a certain level of selfishness that you have to have. His basketball IQ, his basketball acumen, his skill set is so good that he rarely doesn't make the right basketball play. But in that series, like you said, it cost him where you just need to go play bully ball, take the shot, whatever it is that you need to do, but you need to take this over so you guys can win. And I think from that point, since then, we've seen him do that more and more. He'll try to get guys involved early, but when it's time to go, you very rarely now see him give the ball up in crunch time.
And guys, how different is he really when we talk about the overall picture from Michael Jordan? Now, I don't know if Jordan was orchestrating free agency moves as much or not, and the structure of the system was different when Jordan was in his heyday. But I'll guarantee you, the Bulls in the season, Phil Jackson was running everything through a Michael Jackson or a Michael Jordan filter. In other words, the league, a superstar at this level in this league has always had some control. And I agree with you, Francis. LeBron has taken it to a different level in terms of I control my life. But didn't Michael Jordan kind of have, and yet people didn't hack on him as much for this, didn't he kind of have, he had say over what the Bulls were doing in a lot of instances?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he did, but it wasn't nearly as public as what we see with LeBron. I mean, I had a chance to work when I was working for Charlotte, and I worked with, a guy that was one of his teammates one of Jordan's teammates with the Bulls. And he was telling me about how sworn to secrecy they were when they all knew that he was coming back.
Right.
I don't think there's any way you could get away with that now. That he's coming to practice every day for like a month, getting ready for his comeback, and nobody knows anything about it until he says, I'm coming back. So yeah, he's pulling strings behind the scenes and making some things happen, but it's just not the public knowledge, and the access isn't there or wasn't there like it is now. And I think that's really the major difference. There's no way you could keep that under wraps for a month, I think, now the way you could then.
And Danny, maybe a better comparison player-wise is Kobe. Kobe had a lot of control over things with the Lakers, and by then we were starting to know this stuff. We watched as he, certainly, and in the post-Shaq era in LA, Kobe was an orchestrator of some things, and again, didn't get as much.
I think it relates to the fact that Kobe stayed on a team, and I think that people resent the agency that LeBron James has shown in that regard. And that is something that probably gets to some of the questions of fandom and the roots of it in this country. But in my mind, when you're a player, you're also an employee, and you've got control of your own career. And I think it's fascinating to see how guys pilot that. And maybe in rare exceptions, it works out that they're able to stay in one spot. But that idea that you're beholden to that spot is, to me, just it's outdated. And with Michael did exercise control, and sometimes he did it through the way he treated. He was not a great teammate in the regards of how he treated other people sometimes. And in some ways, we lionize that more than we do LeBron, who by all accounts is a pretty generous teammate. Like he's a guy that guys like to play for. I would think that his approval rating among teammates is higher than Michael Jordan's was. And that doesn't mean it's right or wrong, because there's all sorts of different ways to make it. And a guy, when you're performing at that level, I think you have to be true to who you are. And LeBron's just a different type of person than Michael Jordan. But that comes back to our expectations. Are we allowing people to be who they are, or are we wanting them to fit some sort of model of what we think that player should be? And I'll say I consider myself really fortunate in the number of athletes that I've been able to come into contact with, to talk to, and get to fit. That's part of what I love about sports, man, is that each of these guys has different things that make them tick. Ray Allen had something very different that made him tick, and how he prepared and what he was able to do. And they go out and execute at this insanely high level. And LeBron's a very different person than Michael Jordan was. And we're inevitably going to compare them, but that's really what it should show us, is how many different ways there are to find incredible success. And that one of the truths isn't that there's a way you need to do it. It's that you need to find out what's consistent for you, like who you are as an athlete, as a competitor, and all those things. And that I think that the topic you're bringing up is a really good one, Gas, and looking at how we viewed different athletes and that different standards that get applied to guys for a variety of reasons. But it's remarkable what LeBron has done. Even though I'll say this, I don't think LeBron's a particularly good GM. Like, he makes a lot of the decisions. He's got a weird fixation with getting these kind of misfit toys. I consider him, like Rondo, and we had Lance Stevenson. Like, he has a tendency to collect these guys where I'm like, I don't know if that guy's the best skill fit with you. I'm not sure it is, but that's kind of his prerogative. I think we should all be more curious about why guys and how guys are, rather than thinking, well, that's not the way I do it. Well, you probably wouldn't be able to make 5 free throws out of 20. So, like, you should pipe down.
So do you think, sorry, Gas, but
No.
on that topic, so a killer is a killer.
Yep.
But, like, to me, you take Bird and Magic, and you take LeBron and Michael. Bird and Michael are the same. They would just kill you, cut your throat. Mm-hmm. Magic and LeBron, they're hitmen. They'll just come in, pew, pew. But a killer's a killer.
Yep.
They just go about it a different way. And that's the way I've always looked at it with those guys, that, like Danny said, there's different ways to get to the end result and to do what you need to do and to make it happen. But they just go about it in a different way. But a killer is a killer. And those 4 guys will kill you. They just do it in a different way.
Yeah, it's funny too. And I think if you talk to Bird and Jordan, I think they know how similar they are. Mm-hmm. I think they understand that. Yet the way we see them publicly is dramatically different. And there's all sorts of different reasons for that. But it's a fascinating conversation. But I agree. Yeah. LeBron is a killer. Yeah. Absolute 100% killer. Mm-hmm. He'll just do it with a smile.
Yeah.
It's funny that it leads me to, as we wrap it up, I'll bring up something that we could probably do another half hour on, but I thought The Last Dance, I loved it. I loved the behind the scenes stuff. I thought it captured what the 90s NBA was like in a lot of ways. I understood that Michael was involved in it, so I knew it was going to be skewed a little towards him, but I thought they showed, plenty of warts. The one thing, if I had been a producer, and I probably would have lasted about half a day, because I would have asked if we can do this, and then Michael would have probably had me removed. I would have loved, you're talking about players being GMs. I think it would have been fair, since Krause wasn't there to defend himself, and everybody knows Jordan thought Krause was an idiot and all that. I would have loved to see somebody said, now that you've got some experience trying to put a team together and the popcorn's popping as it is, do you have a little more sympathy for how difficult the job is? Because, I thought it was a little unseemly how much they roughed up Krause, since he wasn't there to defend himself. Again, that said, I thought the documentary was great. But Francis, I would think that and he might not admit it, because Michael doesn't like to admit things where he's not on top of it, but maybe he would say, yeah, you know what, I do now have, now I've had to talk to agents and players and try to put the pieces together, and it's harder than I thought it was. I don't know if he'd ever admit that.
Yeah, get him to admit it, I don't know. If I had to vote one way or the other, I'd say probably no, like you said. But I wasn't. I didn't like the documentary. I didn't
really.
I didn't like it.
Why?
Because I just felt like the control. There were too many omissions. Mm-hmm. There were just too many omissions. There were too many guys that were a part of that whole time frame that weren't even mentioned. And I just thought that there were too many omissions for it to be accurate. Was it compelling? So maybe that's what I didn't like, the accuracy. Was it compelling with the part that they did display? Absolutely. I'm not sitting here saying that I didn't watch it. I watched every second of it. But I just thought that there were just a lot of omissions where guys that played a part in whether it was the growth of the Bulls or the success of the Bulls or the demise of the Bulls, whatever it may have been, that deserved some mention that they didn't even get a sniff.
Danny?
Yeah, I'd agree with what Francis says. I think it was more an insight into sort of how Michael Jordan saw his legacy with the Bulls, as much as it was more so than it was an account of what happened. I was fascinated by it, and I was grateful to get that insight into MJ, because I think that was I think we saw, and in some cases in sort of not very flattering fashion, the personality, that killer personality that he had. But no, I
Right.
think that's great. And there are a lot of guys that had different things. I like to imagine, Gas, if you had said that to him, he would have like looked at you very slowly and he said, and I took that personally.
Yeah. He said, Francis is right. I'm a killer and you are next.
But no, it's true, man. I mean, dealing with and building around and maintaining, I'm not sure what's harder in professional sports, if it's building a great team or sustaining a great team.
Right. I think
it's really, and they're different challenges, and they're both really, really hard. And then to do both back to back, I mean, that's why whenever people talk about dynasties and those sort of things, like that's sustaining excellence is every bit as hard as becoming excellent, and figuring out a way around the personalities. I mean, there's a lot to be made that Jerry Krause made an awful lot of really good decisions that he then ends up getting criticized for in ways that, I mean, he wasn't the reason that Scottie Pippen signed that terrible contract. And that's, right. I mean, and Tony Kukoc, pretty good player. Like when it came down to it, like that guy's a pretty good NBA player when he got over there, as mad as he made those guys.
It's funny because the thing I took out of it was, and again, it's just a window into Jordan's soul. If they had stayed together and won a 7th title, he would have made the same documentary about why didn't we stay together and win 8? If they'd have won 8, he did. Why did we stay together? Whenever it was going to end, he was going to feel like there. And what was funny was so many of the guys in it seem very content with their legacy. He should be the most content of all, and it feels like, oh, there's still unfinished business. And I mean, that shows you what a killer, what a competitor. That shows you who he is. He, in his mind, no, we should still somehow be together winning championships.
And I also think that with LeBron's, we talked about LeBron earlier with what's his legacy going to be. I also think it was a reminder to the younger generation that maybe didn't quite know who Michael Jordan was. They know about his shoes. Mm-hmm. They don't know about him. I think it was also a little bit of let me put a little something out there so that those that didn't get a chance to see me play can get a little snapshot of who I was. And it's not just about this LeBron guy. I think there was some of that in there too, even though it wasn't mentioned. I think it was definitely implied.
100%.
We've gone overtime on this one, but I think it was well worth it. I knew this would be good talking to you guys, and now that we know how to find you, we're probably gonna be badgering you in the future. Danny, all the best to you. I'm hopeful that you're back into our world regularly before too long, but meanwhile, I'll just call you when I need stuff, and that'll work. Francis, we're enjoying seeing you with Root Sports' coverage of the Blazers, and that play-by-play guy they got doing those Blazers games. He's good. I don't know who is he.
Where'd they find that guy?
I don't know where they found that guy, but he seems like he knows what he's talking about, huh?
Yep.
Guys, thanks.